Hello again. Today let's talk about detachment. But first, why would you care? Well, okay, I came to this profound insight that wanting something bad enough is already a guarantee that your perception of reality will be skewed. So if you are dying to control some outcome, you already know that your ability to just honestly see what is happening, whether that's a trend for the positive, a trend for the negative, is already impacted by this skewed perception because of how much stake, because of how much is at stake in the outcome. And this is where, if you want to see anything clearly, and therefore be able to react to reality and progress and control your life a tiny bit more, you actually have to fully let go of that control and detach from the outcome and even the process to some extent. You just have to really let it all go. Yeah, let's talk about it. So to quickly recap what we're gonna cover today, we're gonna talk first about how desire skews what you see. So kind of a deeper dive into what I just said. We're gonna see how tracking your own experience puts you inside one of the two lies. Actually, why am I going into this much detail? We're going to cover that right after. Then after we look into when we see how the desire skews what you see, we're going to see what detaching actually provides you as a solution. And then we're going to tie it all together to see how that applies to your creative life and how that can liberate you and connect you even more to your creativity, I guess. And as always, if you're a creative person, that doesn't mean that you're an artist necessarily. You could be an entrepreneur, you could be, just anyone who's trying to live proactively and therefore be creative in the way that you seek out life experiences or, try to impact the world. So yeah, let's talk about how desire skews what you see. I was reading The Almanac by Naval Ravikant recently, and that's where the idea of just desire skewing perception really struck me. And I think the reason why it spoke to me so much is because we talk a lot about detachment as kind of like a way to, have peace of mind, a way to have mental clarity, to be, at peace, to not really be thrown around by whether or not you are able to, get the outcomes that you want, obviously. But I think the more interesting thing about it is not necessarily that, you will have an emotional reaction to being attached to an outcome based on how it goes. But I think the actual problem with being super attached to something and therefore trying to control it is that, as the book mentions, you are all of a sudden certain of one thing, and that's that you're not seeing any of the situation clearly. And this was interesting to me because you would think that, being passionate about a project can lead to, basically you can be passionate about a project and it can work out, but the way that happens is purely by chance, because attachment, which is inevitably a desire to control and a desire for a specific outcome, blinds you. And so whatever happens from that point onwards is just pure luck, because you aren't aware of, where your ship is headed. So it's not to say that you can't achieve anything that you want unless you're detached, because you definitely can, and you can probably close your eyes and walk to the bathroom. But if you want to be meticulous about where you're going in life, or where your project is going, or what's going to happen to your startup, or whatever else you might want to control or might be attached to the outcome of, those are the things where you might actually want to be able to see clearly, to be able to monitor where you're actually succeeding in whatever your mission was originally. But let's return back to my bullet points, which are here for a reason. So the first thing I wanted to talk about and explore is how tracking your own progress puts you inside one of two lies, either delusional optimism or anxious pessimism. What this means is that because by being attached to the outcome, your sense of identity kind of merges with the outcome of whatever you're pursuing, it puts you in a very vulnerable position, because if your identity is attached to your project working out, then all of a sudden it's not, it has to work out, you know, because if it doesn't, it's obviously a personal attack, and that's where your brain, as almost like a self-defense mechanism, will jump to either delusional optimism, where you will hype yourself up and feel like it's going better than it might be, or an anxious pessimism, where you're just constantly anxious about the outcome turning out wrong, and therefore seeing more of the negative symptoms of your project going wrong. And the problem, like we were just talking about it, is that there's no in-between. You can't just be rationally aware of the good, of the bad. It doesn't matter. Like, this is the thing. The delusional optimism and the anxious pessimism have no connection to reality. You can be delusionally optimistic when everything's going horribly wrong, or anxiously pessimistic when everything is going great, just because the attachment element of both those states blind you from being aware of what's actually happening. And I think that's the biggest danger, purely because you don't know, you know, and then therefore you can't actually be conscious of the impact that you're having. And sure, obviously the easy thing is to say, you know, you would like to be aware of how your project is doing to be able to control the outcome. But the real thing is that while you're working on whatever project you have, you're also impacting other people with your own energy, but also with this project. You're also impacting, you know, whether that's relationships in your life or communities that are impacted by your project, etc., etc., etc. It's very important, especially if you're mission driven, to be able to assess the extent to which the project is not just working out, but affecting and having the impact that you intended it to. Because that's kind of the whole point of anything. So yeah, neither version actually sees what's there, and both are filtered through what you expect to be true. And because we're talking about a state where your identity is attached to the outcome, this is very, very personal. It's not what you expect to be true, it's almost what you need to be true for your survival. And the whole idea that Naval mentions in the book, that's not actually written by him, but that's a tangent, is that the stronger the desire, the further the distortion. So the more you care about something, if you're attached to it working out, if you can't hold the possibility of it not working out within yourself, the further you are from seeing reality, and therefore from being able to assess how it's actually going. And this is due to the idea that just perception in general is worse, like less accurate, under higher stakes. And again, this isn't to say that you shouldn't, you know, go all in, or, you know, a lot of people talk about how just there's this common idea that, like, you know, this is my plan A and I have no plan B. And I think that's fine, but your plan A not working out exactly as you expected it to has to be on the table. If not, once again, you're losing the ability to see the truth. And again, doesn't mean, and this is the whole thing, it's like then you also have to renegotiate the definition of failure, because are you okay with it not working out? Maybe you're not okay with that, but are you okay with it working out, but maybe in a different way? And maybe that way at first looks like it's not working out, and then it, you know, leads you somewhere else. This is where, you know, it gets not complicated, but like it becomes more of a balancing act. And yeah, I don't know, this image kind of illustrated perception for me somehow. Less clear now, but when I was starting the recording, it made sense to start with that image. And I think, in general, a lot of art is about detaching. Again, not necessarily that matters. It's not because art is about detaching from the outcome that we should integrate that into our lives. Like, maybe art is also about not having a plan, but that doesn't mean that you have to build a house without having a plan, you know? But I think the interesting thing is just that when you let go of the outcome, you actually open yourself up for more versions of success. So essentially, if you're not expecting one specific result out of your project or endeavor, you essentially increase the, let's go to the possibility diagram, but you increase the possibilities of it working out, and you decrease the possibilities of it not working out, because you open your mind up to, you know, having pit stops on the way, or having moments that make you change the mission itself in a way that, you know, if you look at it in a short-term perspective, maybe it's going to look like failure. But as long as you keep going, and as long as you're open to that shifting nature of things, you can actually increase the possibility of success. And by that logic, if you detach from the outcome, then what is failure? Because even the idea of failure it doesn't exist without you wanting or having a specific idea of success in mind. And it's easy, you know, to accept failure and success as things that are established in life and that are, you know, somewhat objective, but they're not. And even if, you know, we take something that's, you know, pretty widely acceptable as, you know, failure and success examples, let's say, you know, probably like a failed marriage, like having to get a divorce is probably, you know, what people think of as closer to being a failure than to being a success. But you never know. Maybe that person will, you know, in a year from then find the love of their life, and therefore the divorce was actually what led them to a happier life, and therefore a success in the long run. Same thing with like one startup not working out, but it pushing you in a whole different direction, and you finding the actual project that was then going to work out in your life. Because of the continuity element, as long as you don't end the story at the failure, any failure is a pivot. And any success, again, once you look at it in a linear way where after the successful event, life continues, is technically just a point of good before another pivot, another failure. And so this idea of detachment just allows you to surf the waves of life's successes and failures in a way that will A, allow you to see more clearly, and B, I think also give you the possibility to not be as, like the whole first point, just be more peaceful and more stable within your reality, and not lose your self of identity every time you encounter a failure or a pivot along the way. The issue with that is that you can't necessarily you can't not be affected by the failures if you're really affected by the successes. So if a success is really like personally, I'm sorry, I just hit you guys in the ears, but if success is something that really feeds your sense of self and self of identity, chances are failure will really, really hurt that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't celebrate successes. You probably should. You should celebrate more successes, if anything. But I think it's just important to have your sense of self and sense of identity and value and worth be independent of any of those things. But so what does detachment actually give us? There's a difference, I think, between detachment and indifference, which is kind of the equivalence of like when you're indifferent, you just don't care, and therefore you lose all motivation. And that's also not the point. The point is not to stop, working on the projects you care about, but it's more so to keep working on them while just being less emotionally impacted by the immediate outcome, and therefore you don't have to monitor it 24/7 to be able to prepare yourself for potential failure. And so I guess to me it equates to removing like tinted sunglasses versus killing all drive. Because obviously if you're fully detached from anything that you care about, indifferent, then there's no reason to move or do anything at all. And I think there's probably something to that idea too, to just like let it go and just, exist in the world. I don't know why we have to, in a way, constantly be moving and doing something. But at the same time, the world has enough problems that we probably should care about something and should strive for something just for the sake of improving, if not your reality, then the reality of someone else. And again, by this logic, it's just a question of being conscious of the process, being conscious of it going good and bad, and keeping the potential, like the possibility, in mind, like the possibility of, and the feeling, you really have to fully be with your project wherever it is, at whatever stage of the process it is. When it's going well, be with it. When it's not going well, be with it, because then you'll be better equipped to respond to the reality of your, situation, business, whatever. And then I was just thinking about this idea of where the pop star fantasy ends is where your real creative life begins. And I was just thinking a lot about how, like, growing up, I feel like a lot of creative people... Okay, well, this doesn't exist. A lot of creative people, I think, aspire to this pop star fantasy. You watch Hannah Montana and you want to be her, or, you imagine yourself, famous, walking out of a premiere of your movie and whatever. And I think we focus so much on this illusion of what we think being a successful artist is like. But the issue with that is that even as a kid, the time you spend sitting down and imagining what your successful artist life will be like, that's time you could have otherwise been just having fun making art. And the idea here is just that the moment you stop having any idea of what the successful reality looks like in detail is when you actually get to be where you are and to live that, and you get the gift of experiencing the first steps of your creative journey or the next steps of your creative journey. But you get the pleasure, and it's a slow pleasure. It's not necessarily, it doesn't feel like pleasure in the way that fast dopamine, like scrolling or I don't know, like TikToks, like it's not the same sort of like rush of adrenaline and anxiety that makes you feel like you're, having a good time. It's so much slower, and a lot of the times I feel like the process of making art is almost painful, but it's so fulfilling in the same way that, like, if you've ever done a cold plunge, that's like such a fulfilling experience, even though you never want to do it. And I think when you're out of practice making art, it feels the same, even though it's the thing that feeds your soul the most. And again, I understand that, like, visualizing your life and, thinking in detail about what you want and all of these things, I get that can also bring you closer. But the truth of that is that it also just going to take you sitting down and doing the art. And so letting go of the pop star fantasy allows you to, do what it takes to get to somewhere. And again, obviously, where you get, you can't possibly imagine it today. Even if you, spend time trying and like building the idea of what you want, I think it's really important to know what you want, because otherwise you're kind of navigating blindly as well. But I think you have to find a balance between, visualizing and exploring yourself while also living. And I think a lot of the questions also about what you want in life will be answered by trial and error more than by thinking necessarily. Because the issue is that you can only find in your mind what you already have sort of like gathered in experience and information. And, the best insight you can come up with today is nothing compared to like 2 more years of experience and then just insights you've gathered coming together almost naturally while you're like riding a bike somewhere. So I think there's just a balance to be had. And the last point in this section was that the smaller the ego, the less conditioned the reaction, the closer you get to what's real. And from there, productive decisions actually become possible. Huh. No, yeah. So you put your sense of self aside from the outcome. So your project can fail, pivot. You, as like everything you know to be true about yourself and who you are, will not die from that. Because of that, your reaction is not as conditioned, as prescribed as when you're acting out of ego. And that allows you to see the experience that you're having, or that your business is having, or that your project is having. Address it and like level with it. Be in that same reality, good or bad, it doesn't matter. And from there, you can take the decisions and the actions that can actually navigate the boat. Do I have a boat? I think I do. I did have a boat. I knew it. But yeah, you can sleep on a boat because the wind just keeps like, driving you wherever you need to drive or whatever. You can calculate things and then you can take like 6-hour naps. But being conscious and driving it is also, a big part of the thing. And I guess from all of that, the conclusion was that I'm sorry, there's a typo. The conclusion was that you have to move from how do I change the world to match what I want, which is a reactive perspective, to how can I see what's actually there and react to that. But it's not react to that necessarily. It's just exist in it. And I think the moment that you stop looking for proof of what you expect to be true, and you level with what's actually true without necessarily imposing an expectation on it, you can then just do a lot of the same things that you want to be doing more consciously, with much more enjoyment, and ultimately maybe better. So this was this little conversation, which feels, whenever I have less than 3 like main sections in a video essay like this, it feels incomplete. I have more notes here. Oh no. That I always leave in the descriptions. The board that I need to find a solution to keep updating. For now, it's not updated, but there's a lot of interesting like sources and ideas to look into. I also have other boards. This is kind of the conclusion of this video essay. So that was that. But let's see. I also have this thing that I think you can look into. It has a bunch of PDFs that are available on Arena saved. So there's the Creative Act, the Artist Way. Yeah, just a lot of collectibles. Yeah, I haven't looked into a lot of these, but this is like a newsletter, I think, published by a design company. Yeah, I think there's, honestly, if you want to take a deep dive into my Arena boards, even I want to do that. There's just a lot of cool stuff on Arena, and yeah, they're really, really cool. I don't know what Breadcrumbs was. I think I was just collecting cool stuff that I found. Yeah, I don't know. Cool stuff. But yeah, I think this idea is something that I've been kind of like forced to explore recently. Like life just kind of like has been like making me stare it in the face. I've also been reading books about radical acceptance and, I guess topics that are kind of related to this conversation, which we might cover next week or something. I don't really have a plan for next week. I also wanted to bring you more into like the behind the scenes of how these conversations are, put together, how I find my ideas, what I do outside of, this, which some people have been asking for like, more details on the projects that I showed in my like timeline for creative projects, a bunch of things like that. And I want to do that. I have also actually, if you want behind the scenes context, I have been procrastinating out of like fear I guess, but like excitement as well. So I guess like fear of perfectionism, which is I guess the combination of fear and excitement. On a lot of these projects, like I yeah, like I'm supposed to be writing a feature film right now, and I haven't started. Um, I haven't explored the thoughts around why I'm doing the project either, like enough to actually communicate on them. But that, is something that I should probably talk about soon. And it's the intention too. I mean, I can kind of like, no, I was gonna do, like, I was gonna show a little tiny, like, glimpse into the other notes that I have, but I think that's gonna make me feel like I had already talked about it. But yeah, we'll see. I wanna dive into story circles, like the story arcs, like three act structures, 5 act structures, and the different like other ways that people have decided to cut up the story. But I haven't decided yet if I even like structures in stories. So I think it's gonna be kind of like more of an informal video in the same format, where I'm just gonna kind of like explore things and just, I don't know, read out loud or like speak my thoughts, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess that's where all of this is heading. Let's look at the references for now. I feel like, yeah, these, I really wanted to read Flow, which I haven't. But like I said, oh my god, actually, yeah. No, next time I really should talk about radical acceptance. That's been a really cool one. Okay, I feel like I'm starting to talk about things that are outside of this video that I need to make other videos about, so I'm just gonna end this here. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for also staying for this like after party a tiny bit. I hope you enjoyed this one. I won't lie, I wrote the outline for this one like 2 weeks ago. In fact, I wrote it before the obsession video, and the obsession video felt more exciting, so I filmed that first. And so this one kind of did feel a bit outdated, not necessarily the content, but just the like rawness of the thought. I think kind of dried up a tiny bit just because I'm on a different page of this conversation in my head. Again, thinking more about radical acceptance. And actually I recommend the book by, what's her name? Tara Brach, I think is her name. And it's called Radical Acceptance. And it just talks about how to deal with failure and grief and loss, and how we're by default designed to feel like we're unworthy. And so anytime failure happens, it feels very personal, even though it's part of life. And there's actually a very beautiful metaphor, and I don't know if it's in that book or another book that I'm reading at the same time. The other book I'm reading at the same time, it's called Fail Again, Feel Better. And that book is also incredible. As you can see, a lot of failure-related topics recently. I don't know why. That book's incredible. Also recommend it. Also will probably talk about it, or like I probably should talk about it. In one of those books, there's a metaphor of failure being this wave that knocks you over. And so you're left there laying on the sand, like sand and water in your nose and your ears and your eyes, whatever. And you have the choice to stay there laying down, which is what like failure knocks you over, and you can stay there and not do anything, but you will die. Or you can get up, walk forward again, and after a while another wave will come and it will knock you down. And after an even longer while, you might be able to skip one wave, skip another wave, and become stronger, but then there'll come an even bigger wave, and that wave will knock you down. And it's kind of just like this perpetual notion of life being, just a sequence of trials and tribulations. And yeah, I'm still thinking about it, so nothing to share yet, but those 2 books I really recommend, and I think they're especially helpful as kind of like books to keep around and kind of like to read every now and then. The Fail Again, Feel Better, that one is like super short. I mean, it's a longer book, but the first chapter is like a speech, and that speech I genuinely kind of want to like read out loud to myself maybe like every week or something, just because it reminds you of what it's like to be a young person in the world, but also an old person in the world. It's just that the speech specifically was given to college graduates, and it's kind of about you know, like this is the world you're walking into, and the best thing you can do is just learn to fail really, really well, because that's inevitably what's ahead of you and what's ahead of all of us. And not necessarily in a bad way. Like, I feel like this sounds pretty grim, but I think there's a lot of beauty in a lot of these learnings, and I'm excited to share them soon. So yeah, all right, I'll leave you at this. Yeah, I hope this found you well. I've been working too much. My corporate job has been infiltrating my mind, but I hope you're doing good, and I'll see you next week. All right, bye bye.